I never expected a single piece of clothing to change anything about my life, let alone the way I understood myself. Yet the moment my fingers brushed the blue dress for the first time, something delicate and electric shifted beneath my skin. It hung on the rack as though waiting, shimmering softly under the shop's pale lights, its fabric catching color the way water catches the last flare of sunset. I remember standing there longer than I meant to, feeling faintly foolish for being drawn to something so clearly not intended for me, yet unable to make myself walk away. There was a quiet hum in the air, the peculiar sense that the world had paused to watch a choice unfold, and I suppose that, in its own strange way, it had. I told myself I only wanted to feel the fabric, to admire the stitching, to appreciate the workmanship the way an observer appreciates a painting. But the moment it was in my hands, a warmth pulsed through my fingers, subtle yet unmistakable, like an exhale from something alive. For a long moment, I simply stood there, caught between logic and the inexplicable tug in my chest, urging me to try it on. And even though every reasonable part of me knew I should put it back, step away, pretend none of this ever happened, I found myself moving toward the fitting rooms, my thoughts scattering like startled birds, while something deeper guided my steps. Inside the changing room, the air was still and faintly perfumed with fabric softener and the lingering echo of countless strangers. The dress rustled as I lifted it, cool and fluid as water, and when I slipped it over my head, the world shifted. The sensation wasn't dramatic. No brilliant flash, no thunderous rush of power, but a gentle enveloping wave that rolled through me like warm light. Colors sharpened, the air thickened, and when the dizziness settled, I lifted my gaze to meet the mirror. And she was there. I stood frozen, breath caught in my throat as unfamiliar eyes blinked back at me. My eyes, and yet not entirely mine. The shape of the face, the softness of the jawline, the curve of the lips, all of it exquisitely different yet deeply, achingly familiar, on some level I didn't understand. My hands trembled as I lifted them, and the reflection mirrored the motion perfectly, delicate fingers tracing the outline of a face I had never worn before. I should have been terrified. Instead, a strange calm blossomed inside me, spreading like sunlight through water. It wasn't simply seeing a stranger in the mirror. It was recognizing something that had been waiting beneath the surface, something that exhaled at last. When I stepped out of the shop in that borrowed body, the afternoon felt unreal, the light too soft, the breeze too gentle, as though the world was cushioning me from the edges of reality. Every footstep felt like walking deeper into a dream whose rules I didn't yet know, but somehow understood in my bones. I remember the way people looked at me, not with confusion or suspicion, but with casual acceptance, as though I simply belonged in this shape, this form, this life. Every gesture became a discovery, every sound a small revelation, the melody of my voice, the way the dress swayed around my legs, the quiet thrill of existing in a body that felt unexpectedly natural. It was intoxicating in a way I didn't have the words for. The cafe was warm and bustling when I wandered in, seeking a moment to steady myself. The scent of roasted coffee beans swirled in the air, rich and grounding, and I slid into a seat near the window, still half afraid the reflection might vanish if I blinked too long. That's where I met Joan. She approached with the easy warmth of someone who has never learned to second-guess kindness, her smile widening as though greeting an old friend rather than a stranger in a magical disguise. We spoke lightly at first, about the weather, the coffee, the dress that shimmered whenever I shifted, but soon the conversation deepened into a natural, effortless companionship that felt startlingly rare. She didn't question who I was or where I came from. She simply welcomed me into her orbit as though I had always been meant to step into it. Then there was Jim, steady and quiet, with a gentleness that threaded itself through his every word. He was the kind of man who listened fully, whose eyes softened when he spoke, as though choosing each syllable with care. Even though I knew this wasn't truly my life, that I was walking borrowed ground, I felt something warm unfurl within me when he asked if we could talk again. Not a romantic flutter exactly, but a sense of being seen, really seen, in a way I hadn't experienced in a very long time, perhaps ever. When the sun dipped low and the sky deepened into velvet dusk, I returned home. The transformation faded as soon as the zipper slid down and the dress pooled at my feet like the shed skin of some mythical creature. My body reverted, familiar but heavier somehow, as though carrying the weight of a secret too large to fit neatly inside my chest. I folded the dress gently, reverently, my hands lingering on the fabric as though it might whisper answers to the countless questions swirling through my mind, but it offered only its silent promise. The days that followed moved strangely, their rhythms disrupted by the echo of that other life. I went to work, nodded through conversations, performed tasks with automatic precision, all while a quiet longing pulsed beneath my thoughts. Every evening, I found myself drawn to the dress, like a tide pulled by the moon. Sometimes I simply stared at it, the way one stares at a doorway they aren't yet brave enough to walk through again. Other nights, I paced my room, debating, rationalizing, pretending I wasn't waiting for an excuse to slip into it once more. But curiosity is a patient, persistent force, and desire, when it's honest, does not stay quiet for long. One evening, after a long, unremarkable day, I stood again before the dress. The room held a stillness that felt like permission. My heartbeat quickened, but this time the fear was softer, tempered by the memory of how natural it had felt to exist in that other form. I lifted the dress, inhaling deeply as the fabric brushed my skin, and when I slipped it over my head, the transformation embraced me like a returning tide. No panic, no disbelief, only a warm, blooming recognition. I turned toward the mirror and she smiled back, not with surprise, but with familiarity, as though welcoming me home after a long journey. I felt a steadiness within myself, a surge of courage I didn't know I possessed. This wasn't escape, it wasn't fantasy, it was discovery, pure and quiet and profound. With calm hands, I gathered my things, stepped out into the corridor, and made my way into the night. The cool air kissed my skin as though greeting an old friend, and the streetlights shimmered like beacons guiding me forward. Each breath felt fuller, each step lighter, each moment brighter. I understood then that this was no longer a question of curiosity. It was the beginning of a path I could no longer pretend not to see. And as the night opened itself before me, I felt it completely. The unmistakable sensation that my life had shifted into motion, carrying me towards something vast, delicate and wondrous, something I had longed for without ever knowing its name. What surprised me most about returning to that other form was not the transformation itself, nor even the intoxicating ease with which I moved through the world afterward, but the strange, growing certainty that the woman in the mirror was not simply a disguise or an illusion conjured by the dress. She felt like a part of me that had been waiting patiently in the shadows, a quiet truth that had never been given permission to breathe. And now that she had, the air of my ordinary life felt different, thinner, quieter, as if every part of it had been gently unsettled. Each morning I woke in my familiar body, but the memory of the other self lingered with a vividness that blurred the line between experience and longing. The world felt subtly out of sync, like a song played at the slightest wrong speed, recognizable, yet not quite right. I moved through my routines with a kind of echoing awareness, sensing the presence of another rhythm underneath, one I could only hear when the dress rested against my skin and the transformation swept over me. The more time passed, the more the contrast deepened. In my usual life, conversations felt flatter, interactions more scripted, as though I were walking through the motions of a play whose lines no longer resonated. But the moment I became her again, everything sharpened into focus. Colors glowed richer. Sounds carried texture. Even my own thoughts felt clearer, as though the other form unlocked a different way of experiencing the world, one that I had unknowingly craved for years. I found myself reaching for my phone to scroll through Joan's messages, reading her words with a smile I couldn't quite explain, and rereading Jim's thoughtful, slow-type notes that seemed to anchor something deep within me. The connections I made as her, those fleeting, gentle threads, felt more genuine than most relationships I had formed in my entire life. And yet, I knew I could not simply step into that life without reckoning with the one I still lived in. It was on a Thursday evening, after a long day that drained me to the marrow, that I finally allowed myself to stop resisting the pull. The dress waited where it always hung, shimmering with that quiet promise that had first ensnared me, and the moment my fingers touched its fabric, a familiar warmth sparked through me. I slipped it on, the transformation blooming through me in that soft, luminous way, and when I opened my eyes again, I felt the shift settle into place like a click of alignment. I did not hesitate this time. I stepped into the night with steady breath, letting the cool air wash over me as though baptizing me into this other existence. My steps carried me toward the cafe, drawn by instinct as much as memory, and as I entered, the room brightened with recognition, Joan's smile lighting up like the flare of a candle in the dark. She greeted me with easy excitement, as though my presence filled some small space of her day with unexpected color, and we talked for what felt like hours. Her laughter touched something soft inside me, like a note struck on a string I hadn't known existed. She asked gentle questions, not prying, simply curious, her voice threading warmth into every word. And even though I carried a truth she could not yet know, I found myself wanting to stay in her orbit, to see what shape our connection might take if I allowed it. There was no pretense with her, no performance, only the quiet certainty that I was seen, not for the body I wore, but for the person who breathed inside it. When she reached across the table and squeezed my hand lightly, the touch lingered like an imprint long after the moment ended. Later, outside beneath the glow of a street lamp, I found Jim waiting. He seemed almost shy in his greeting, standing with his hands in his pockets, the wind brushing faint motion through his hair. There was something profoundly grounding about him, as though he existed as a steady point in a world that had begun to tilt in mysterious ways. We walked together without speaking at first, our footsteps falling in quiet harmony on the pavement. Eventually he broke the silence, asking softly about my day, and though I could not give him the whole truth, I answered in the ways that mattered, about how I felt, what stirred inside me, what I wanted but could not yet articulate. He listened, truly listened, his eyes gentle, his nods encouraging, and somewhere in the midst of that shared stillness, I felt the delicate possibility of trust forming between us. When we parted, he hesitated for a moment before asking if he could see me again. The question held no demand, no pressure, only quiet hope, and the answer I gave was simple, honest. Yes. It felt like a door opening, not to romance exactly, but to something else, recognition perhaps, or understanding. As I walked home in the cool night, the world seemed to hum beneath my feet, alive in a way that made my usual life feel like a grayscale memory. The transformation flickered away the moment I removed the dress, leaving me standing barefoot and breathless in the dim light of my room. But the feelings remained, vivid and undeniable, refusing to fade with the magic. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling for a long time, the weight of my two lives pressing softly against my ribs. I understood that the dress had not simply changed my shape. It had revealed something, peeled back a layer I had unknowingly wrapped around myself for years. Each time I transformed, I felt closer to the person I was meant to become, not because the magic made me someone new, but because it unveiled a truth I had buried. The question that had hovered around me since the first transformation finally began to take shape. Was I truly living or merely existing within boundaries I never chose? The woman I became in the dress was not an escape. She was an emergence. The following days carried a different weight. I found myself looking into mirrors longer than before, not out of vanity but curiosity, searching for hints of her within my familiar reflection. Sometimes I caught glimpses, an angle of the jaw, a softness of expression, a flicker of confidence, and each glimpse stirred a quiet ache. I began responding more readily to messages from Joan and Jim, weaving small threads of connection through the fabric of my ordinary days, feeling comfort in their presence even when I could not be with them physically. And as each evening approached, I felt the pull again, gentle but persistent, like the moon tugging at the tide. Eventually, I knew I had to confront the truth. This wasn't a temporary adventure. It wasn't a secret indulgence or a strange anomaly. It was the unfolding of something real, something inward, something essential. The dress had given me a doorway, but the steps I took through it were my own. And so one night, standing before the mirror with the dress in my hands, I made a choice, not out of impulse, but from a place of growing clarity. When the transformation washed over me this time, it felt different, steadier, more grounded, as though the magic recognized my resolve. I looked into the mirror and saw not a disguise, but a reflection that resonated with the deepest parts of me. I went back to the cafe, back to the streets, back to the night that had begun shaping itself around this new truth. Joan greeted me with a smile that warmed me through, and Jim's calm presence steadied something fragile within me. The world did not collapse. Nothing shattered. Instead, everything aligned quietly, gently, as though it had always been waiting for me to reach this moment. I understood then that I was no longer living between two selves. I was becoming whole. And while the future remained uncertain, woven with questions and choices yet to be faced, I stepped forward with a steadiness I had never felt before, knowing that whatever lay ahead, I would meet it fully, honestly, and with the courage born from finally recognizing who I truly was.